Well, good evening, and thanks for coming out. First of all, I wanted to tell you this title, Venture Investing Made Easy, is a misnomer. If I'd believed that when I got into this profession, I'd be in another profession. But the luckiest thing that ever happened to me was getting an engineering degree and a science PhD on top of that, and headed to a place called Silicon Valley. And this was before it was called Silicon Valley. So I lived in Berkeley for 3 years, and it was an amazing place to hang around with all those great Nobelists and science people. Then I moved to San Francisco, where I met and married Linda Chalice Gill. And we have 4 kids. 2 of them grew up in Berkeley, 2 in Palo Alto, so California family. So the first thing I wanted to tell you is kids that grew up in California have a distorted view of the world. If you believe that that's normal demographics, you know, for different reasons, Berkeley, you know, is berserkly, and Palo Alto, you know, every neighbor we had was Nobel laureate, investment banker, billionaire, company founder, or somebody like Steve Jobs. And, you know, how can you teach young kids that that's not normal demographics? So that's a special challenge. Somehow I got over that. And we were so pleased to get one granddaughter to come to SMU. Where are you? Let's hold your hand up. Stand up. I want everybody to know. So this is going to be a fast-paced overdose about the venture capital profession, where it was, where it is, where it's going, and some perspectives on Dallas. So this is the first thing I teach my students in the classes I teach, going back to Stanford days and then MIT and Harvard, is what we call logo bio. So, you know, a nice rhetorical introduction, Steve, thanks for that, that was great, is one thing, but your picture's worth 1,000 words. So we teach students to show all their pit stops with logos, and then, you know, that's another pathway to the brain and seems to work well. So logo bio. I was asked to start with sort of the early days and how I got into the business of venture capital. So my first gig in California, I was hired into a hotshot young venture-backed startup named Wilkins Instruments, and it had been founded by a cantankerous but brilliant scientist. And on the sheer strength of $10,000 credit card financing and his great product ideas, he had taken his company from startup to about 10 million in revenues. And he was running out of gas because he needed management help. He was a lousy manager by personality, but he was smart enough to know he was a lousy manager. So he hired 5 guys like me. 2 of them were Harvard MBAs, 2 of us were PhD scientists, and a 5th one was Chinese-American salesman. And we took the company from 10 million to 300 million in revenues, and then got acquired by Variant. So that was my first dose into Silicon Valley startup. A few years later, started Vanguard with a great scientist named Dr. David Ramler, one of the smartest guys I ever knew. Dr. Ramler went to med school at UCLA, and then after his 3rd year of med school decided, I really don't want to be a clinician. So he switched from UCLA to UC Berkeley and obtained a PhD in biochemistry on Nobel laureate Khorana. Later a JD and MBA just to round out his suit. So we patterned Vanguard after the early Kleiner-Perkins partnerships. A guy named Tom Perkins was a very close friend of mine and my primary mentor. He was an MIT undergrad engineer and a Harvard MBA by background, and 10 years at Hewlett-Packard, starting their computer operations. Eugene Kleiner was a neighbor, a near neighbor, and my kind of guy. He was a Brooklyn Polytech PhD engineer by background, a brilliant conceptual kind of guy. And the 2 of them were quite formidable, and of course built what is now the world's best known, perhaps most successful venture capital firm. I was actually offered an opportunity to join them as the 3rd partner, which got me into discussions with them, and they had gone from a $7 million startup fund to a $25 million second fund to a $75 million third fund, and they were raising 150 on the 4th, and they wanted to add 2 or 3 partners. And so I was in those discussions. But I was very curious about why go up market so quickly from 7, 25, 75, 150. And Tom Perkins explained to me several things, but the most important thing I learned from him was it's a whole lot easier to create a big multiple return on a small base than it is a big multiple return on a big base. It's a very important concept, and I'll get into that a little more here about how firms work. So Vanguard 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, as Steve Corral mentioned, total 155 million. We returned over $1 billion to those investors, which translates into about 50% annual compound rate of return, depending on when the money comes in and when it goes back. But the things we tracked that was more fun for us was the revenues of the companies that we helped create, the number of jobs created, how many millionaires were made from that process, and how much market cap resulted. So that was a very gratifying era for us and allowed us to achieve top tier ranking in the venture fund. Now, we call this our finest hour, which is our Vanguard 4 fund, which was $37 million. So we had the discipline to stick to a smaller fund, and what we called it was big enough to be a major player, but no bigger than necessary, because a bigger return is the name of the game. And this particular fund was in the 90s, and what was important in the 90s is this is when AT&T was required to divest, and entrepreneurial processes were brought into the telecom industry. So the massive layout of fiber optic cable connecting all cities, countries, and continents, followed by two technologies which were unbelievably important. One called dense wave division multiplex, where you can pulse many different wavelengths of light down a single fiber. And the second one called fiber doped amplifiers, which is a lot more powerful than electronic amplifiers. So with these two technologies, this is what truly enabled the internet as we know it. And so I was lucky to hire a partner from Hambrecht & Quist who helped me understand those markets. And so in this Vanguard 4 fund, this was what we call our telecom era. We invested that $37 million in 19 companies. And one of them alone, called Sienna, which had its roots here in Dallas, Texas, returned 11.5 times the whole fund. So 425 million back to investors who put up 37. So, you know, if you do that with one company out of 19, do you care what the other 18 do? Well, yeah, because you hate to lose and you love to win, right? But telecom was good to us in that era. So advanced fiber communications in Northern California was another great investment. We made 80x our money on that, 130 on Sienna, 60 on another company called Network Equipment Appliances, which is still a large independent company, and then 2 or 3 medical companies. So the 13 million invested in those 5 companies returned 700 million plus. And collectively, these 5 returned 19 times that fund, and that's what carried the day. So how did we do things like that? What did we look for? Well, you know, we always look through truly breakthrough technologies, killer market applications, high growth industries. You want to be first mover in the marketplace. You want to go global immediately. And above all, if you don't have world-class management, somebody else will out-execute you. And a compelling business model that makes lots of money, and if it's not exciting and fun, why bother? So that's kind of the formula that we worked. But we also stressed a big, what we call value-added role. All venture capitalists can bring money to the table, but a lot less of them can bring true help to the table. So unless you've been a founder yourself or a senior operating executive or general manager or CEO, you're not as able to help as much as perhaps could be leveraged. So we stress the importance of that. So in nearly all those companies, we were the ones who found the opportunity, structured the board, was chairman of the board, and most involved with the founders. So from my perspective, you know, it was a great industry, had a lot of fun, very lucrative, satisfying, but very intense and tough and demanding and competitive and certainly stressful. So it's a whole lot best to get management and operations experience if you're going to be a venture capitalist. So it's not for the young and relatively inexperienced. So what's Silicon Valley like? Well, it's like a turbocharged rat race. And you're only as good as your last fund return. So in Vanguard 1 and 2, I returned 3.2x and 3.5x. Vanguard 3 was in a tough era where there were no IPOs, and I barely was able to get 1.3x money back. They could have invested in bank notes and done just as well. Well, guess what? Some of my largest Eastern big institutional investors said, Jack, that's not good enough. We're out of here. Well, guess what? So they dropped out after Vanguard 3 and missed the big Vanguard 4, 19X that came up later. So the thing you should know about the venture capital business is it's a statistics game and it's a long run game. So if you invest in one venture capital firm one time, it's moderate to high risk perhaps. If you pick a good firm and stay with it at least 3 cycles, it's a lot lower risk and more lucrative returns. If you pick 3 or 4 good firms and stick with them 3 or 4 times, that's how the big boys play and that's how they make the big money. That's why I say the zenith may have passed because returns are tougher in today's world because we have this world of big mega funds like Sequoia and Kleiner Perkins and NEA and TA and Andreessen Horowitz and so on. And we have ever more startups, so there's a big gap in between. So small firms and boutique firms who help new entities get off the ground are far less today than they used to be. Well, this is my best page, and I call it why I love this business. The numbers in the starburst are the multiples we made on all these deals. Best deal ever was one guy walks in one day, he needed $1 million to get started, and he needed a connection with Apple. So, you know, people like Jobs and Wozniak were among my early investors, so that we could make that connection. I gave him his $1 million. I thought he'd be back next year for another $2 million or $3 million to bring product to market. But Aldous invented desktop publishing and brought a product called PageMaker to the marketplace. That was the first powerful where you can do market graphics and publications on your desktop. Never needed more than the startup 1 million capital. It went public in month 35, so less than 3 years old, at a 500 million market cap. The founder made 300 million himself, and I made 200x my 1 million investment in less than 3 years. So that's what we call a good day, or a good year. I could tell you a lot more stories about losers, but we don't have time. Sienna was one of the best. We invested 3.2 in this, made 425. So telecom was a real hot era, but so was computers and medical devices and biotechs and so on. So we were a diverse firm. Here's a few slides from one of the lectures. I originated a course at Stanford way back in the old days, and then taught it full-time at Harvard Med School for life science PhDs and MDs, and then at MIT for technologist PhDs, all about the entrepreneurial process. So we'd always start out by surveying what's the venture capital world all about, what do firms do and how do they work and this and that. So this just happens to be the header from this year's class at Rice. We have about 200 take this every year at Rice. It was our 12th year. And so briefly we'll flip slides by about characteristics of the industry, an update on global numbers, what the major trends are, and a quick snapshot of what Texas looks like. So here's what I always like to start with. It's a true statement that in the entire history of the world, in a short time of a couple of decades, in a place called Silicon Valley, more enterprises has been founded, more money raised to start those companies, more jobs created, more product brought to world market, more companies taken public, more market value created, more millionaires made, and more billionaires made than any other time or place in the history of the world. That's a big statement, a big statement. But that's truly the nature of what Silicon Valley has all been about. California today accounts for well over 50%. It varies anywhere from 50 to 70 by a quarter, by a year. Now here's a way I like to put in best perspective. 10 West Coast companies, so Apple, Intel, Oracle, Facebook, Google, and Cisco and Gilead, and Genentech, all in Silicon Valley between San Francisco and Palo Alto, and 2 in Seattle, Amazon and Microsoft, all venture-backed, all fairly young companies, okay? Market value as of 2-3 weeks ago, whenever I last looked, of those 10 West Coast companies, $5 trillion. They created 1.25 million jobs. Now to get you calibrated, here in Texas, of course, we're very proud of our energy industry, and rightly so. And a decade ago, 6 of the 10 largest companies on the Fortune 5 were energy companies. Today, there's only one, ExxonMobil there, and the value of all 10 biggest combined is less than $1 trillion, when these 10 new companies created $5 trillion in value. That should tell you where the world is going. That should tell you the important role of technology in the economy today. That tells you why we have endless numbers of grad students coming from China, Japan, Korea, and other great countries to come here because of the quality of our graduate education. We're lucky we get to keep a bunch of them, but many of them finally repatriate. And of course, nobody is more energized to exceed the great economic output of the United States than China. And they have 1.6 billion people, and we have only 320 million people. So, you know, the secret sauce of the world's economy and American economy is high-tech entrepreneurship, and we must keep it going. Pretty dramatic set of numbers. Well, every class I teach, I always want to get calibrated with a student, so I have them take a 2-minute self-assessment test. I hope you picked one of these up on the way in, if not on the way out. What's your entrepreneurial DNA? There's a 16 criteria self-assessment test. You rank yourself from 0 to 10 on 16 criteria and then add it up. And you can calibrate how entrepreneurially driven you are. So without a lot of thinking, you put a number in a box from 0 to 10. How much energy do I have? How self-confident, comfortable with the rest, restless, unsatisfied, driven, spirited, da-da-da. Even subjective things like gets more done with less or comes from another planet. Somebody always interrupts me there and says, Professor Gill, what does that mean, come from another planet? My answer is, if you have to ask, you didn't. If you're in the top quadrant, 140 or more score, I call you a big E or big time entrepreneur. If you scored in that 7, 8, 9, 10 for most of those boxes, you'd be a wannabe entrepreneur. If you scored in the third quadrant, I call you a BIBO, better in a big organization. Because big organizations and Fortune 5 companies and big institutions have a lot of HR manuals and procedure manuals, and they tell you how to do things. And that's the last thing entrepreneurs would ever want to tune into, is somebody tell them how to do something. They want to do it their way on their terms and so forth. If you scored in the lower quadrant, we say you're probably good at something, but you're a senile, certainly not an entrepreneur. So are Americans the first ones? Well, not really. We had all these great 19th century American pioneering entrepreneurs, and just look at the industries they created. That's what put US of A on the map as the world's largest and greatest economy. And the modern day version of that is things like FedEx and Apple and Intel and Microsoft and Oracle and Google and Facebook and Amazon and so forth. So, you know, these guys are clearly in the same league as those guys in terms of impact they've made on the world and the economy. There's a long history of high-tech innovations. You know, Chinese were doing this literally millennia ago with inventions like crossbows and skyrockets. Indians and Mayan cultures were great at mathematics and astronomy, and Egyptians were great engineers who built things still standing today. But then we had this unbelievable era of dark ages, only to awaken in the 16th century, and printing press and education brought us back. And look, mostly it's all in the 19th and 20th century. Transportation and engines and telephones, automobiles, rockets, and so forth. But look at what's going on now. Software, laser photonics, genomics, proteomics, biotech, nanotech, internet, wireless apps, and space station, and global positioning, smartphones, and media, and so forth. Amazing how complex the world is today. Great time to be a techie nerd, and great time to be an entrepreneur. So who are the current 21st century powerhouses? US and China, clearly the two biggest leaders by far, followed by Japan, which is a mature juggernaut kind of economy, but South Korea coming on strong, India coming on strong. So what are critical mass factors? You got to have great resources like science engineers and capital and so forth. You got to have great infrastructure supporting these things, and you got to have favorable conditions, because people just don't want to live where these lie. But look how small areas of the planet are rich in VC concentration. North America, small parts of Europe, in Asia. So let's look at some quick numbers here. So the powerhouses in the U.S., of course, is Silicon Valley and Boston, New York, New England. But emerging leaders like New York, New Jersey, Connecticut areas, Austin, Dallas, Houston certainly on the list, Seattle, Portland, LA, San Diego, and so on. Note that, Wall Street Journal has consistently declared Texas to be #1 business climate in the last several years. But over 75% of all venture activity is still East Coast, West Coast. So what's the numbers today? About 900 firms managing 300 and something billion. Typical fund has 4 to 10 partners, maybe 1 or 2 offices, creates a new fund every 3 or 4 years. With that amount of money, maybe 100 million or whatever, they would put a portfolio of maybe 18, 20, 22 companies together. And they're seeking liquidities within 4 to 7 years to return money to investors. Money comes from a lot of different sources, but university endowments are major players. Why do they invest in venture? For superior returns. They expect something like 3 to 5 times return in 5 to 7 years. If you do the math, that's like 20 to 30 compound annual rate of return versus the 3 or 4 or 5% today you might get in normal investments in the stock market and so on. Why do general partners like this business? Well, after they return 1x of the investment, they earn 20 to 30% of the gains thereafter. And of course, they get a management fee all along. And management fee, $2.5 million of a $100 million fund, is enough for several partners to make a decent living, operate offices, travel, and expenses of being in the business, but never going to get rich on management fee, okay? So general partners are highly wired to do a big multiple return. That's what makes it really work. So real quick, some numbers. This is Q4 17 data. Top 5 sectors: internet apps, healthcare, mobile tech, software, and consumer products. Who's a big player? Of course, California. This is Q2 18 data by region. San Francisco, we used to think of that as the periphery of Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley being centered mostly around Stanford, 25 miles more or less. And San Francisco was traditional, old, great city and didn't have a lot of tech enterprise. But for whatever reasons, the media industry decided to agglomerate there. So people like Salesforce.com and others. So that has now grown to such proportions, as you can see in recent data. They exceed Silicon Valley in the number of deals. So now, those of us who sort of classically trained and lived in the middle of it, Palo Alto, we call San Francisco part of Silicon Valley. They see it as maybe a different zone or region. But look, if you combine San Francisco and classic Silicon Valley, it's just off the chart in terms of high percent, 62% by these numbers of all US deals. But also look, New York, New England is pretty impressive players, and Southern California as well. Here's data Q4 17 by top states. So California by deals, New York, Massachusetts, Texas, which has been about 7th, up to 4th in this list. But look, 42 is not even 10% of that deal, California. But the population of California is about 40 million. Population of Texas is nearly 30 million. So we're almost parity, in population, but 10x a difference in deals. Investments in the venture-backed companies, this by region. So again, it shows the numbers. So if you look at the whole West Coast, 8.9 billion this era. Whole East Coast, Boston, New York, New England, 5, 1.6. So here, we're emerging, getting stronger, but certainly not in a major way. So Texas has about the 7th largest overall VC market, about 40 venture firms, pure venture capital firms, something like 20 billion under management. Dallas, known mostly for aerospace and communications. Austin, more for software and chips and internet. And Houston, more for energy, biotech, and medical and nano. And whereas we've had some great successes, we don't have a lot of lasting legacy. So for example, compact computers earned its way to the top firm in worldwide market share for PCs, and at one time was Houston's largest employer. Ultimately, it was acquired by Hewlett-Packard, who closes the doors and moves all those people to Arizona and to California. So we need to have residual people bailing out of local great companies, founding the next great companies and so forth to do some catch up. And we are, of course, an emerging player and second most populous, number one business, so we ought to be doing better. Here's the actual numbers raised. In 15, 58 billion, down a little in 16, up to a new record in 17. And guess what? Just came out this week. We're on a pace now to exceed 100 billion for the first time ever by far for the calendar year 2018. So again, great time to be an entrepreneur. Money is there. Portfolio strategies, this just illustrates the principle and powers. So you take 100 million hypothetical, you invest in 20 startups, anywhere from 2 or 3 to maybe 10 or more, depending on how the company success unfolds. And you get a mix of outcomes. You get winners, you get losers, you get laggards. The old rule of thumb was no matter how smart you are or how lucky you are or how hard you work, it's going to be about a third, a third, a third. So this is what we expect. If you don't take enough risk of high-tech stuff at the new cutting edge, you're probably going to miss the big ones. So you take conscious risk, but you lose a lot. You want to lose fast, and lose often, and get out of there. Run for cover. Here's what saves you is when you get a winner, if you lose 1x. If you get a winner, 2x, 5x, 10x. I showed you 100x, 200x. So one big winner carries the day. So it's a game of statistics. And then you have those that hang out there so long, late bloomers, who cares, you know? And here's what the partners are doing. In the first 3 years, you're making investments, building a portfolio, and that's a lot of heavy lifting, hard work there. Year 3 to 5 is when the losers start to emerge and maybe the earliest winner, but by that time you've probably started your second fund. And then most of your liquidities happen year 4 to 7, and then you're in a full ball game of mix here. And so in a typical year, about 3 funds per decade. And this shows the statistical power. So if you assume home run hits 100x, 30x, 10x winner, 3x loser, 0. You know, you could have virtually no big hits, maybe a couple of decent winners, and maybe 4 so-sos, and still get better than 1x capital return. So not bad. If you're a good performance, you get at least 1 big hit every cycle, and 1 or 2 more winners and more in that okay category. 4 to 5 times money compounds to something like 20% plus compound annual rate of return. So that's the power of statistical portfolios. If you get really lucky and have a what we now call unicorn, or a big hit like a Sienna, and then more in this category, you know, then these big ratios, that's what carries the day. So that's an update on the venture business. Let's move ahead and talk about some war stories from Silicon Valley. Here is 20 years of Vanguard deals, so it's something like 100 deals or more there. The ones in gold at the top were all mega hit winners in gold. The ones in green were all big hit, meaning usually 5, 10, 15, 20x kind of deals. One in blue were decent little outcomes, the rest, and all those black ones are losers, okay? Now, in addition to deals, we also often participate in putting incubators together with other partners, major corporate concerns and major venture capital firms. So that's what a whole 10 or 20-year portfolio might look like. But we boil it down to winners, losers, and irrelevance. So, you know, and behind each of these we have detailed stories, war stories, where they came from, how much invested, who were our partners, and so on. Winners, losers, irrelevant. Don't have time for this introductory discussion. We do the same thing in IT, media, and telecom, so forth. So here's why I love this business. 5 big winners, 40x to 200x. And this is sort of what some people think it's like, you know, private jets and What do you do? What do you do with all your big money, and where do you vacation? That's not the reality for most people, but I won't go through these, but we have a backup sheet that shows for every deal where it came from, who was a founder, how much initial capitalization, additional capitalizations, what's the product, revenues, in this case it was 0, 30, 80, 150 million, all on a $1 million capitalization. So that leads to the math and outcome and public and exits, and there's 80 million we made. You know what was sad for me is this deal came at a time when there were millions and millions of PCs out there, and the hot ball game was how much application software can we bring to market. Then all of a sudden it was believed that we've kind of done all the major things you can do, and so this sector was losing its interest. So when this entrepreneur approached me, I agreed to help him get $1 million capitalization and off to the races. And I introduced him to our friends at Apple. And so some say Aldous PageMaker made the Macintosh because Mac was under pressure from PCs and didn't have any unique software. And this was the first piece. Some say, of course, Macintosh and Apple made Aldous, but they made each other. But what was interesting is, as I pointed out before, he never needed more capital after 0, 30, 80 million, 150 ramp. Now, at that time, I structured the deal, but I gave away 60% of it. Why would I be dumb enough to do that? Well, because the sector is not as hot as it was, and we had a lot of friends. So I invited a second venture firm in for equal amount to Vanguard, and one of my large private investors, single individuals, to take the other 20%. So literally on a deal that was my highest ratio of 200x, I gave away 60% of it. But can I complain? Yeah, I made $80 million on 400, so that's the way life is. I don't have time to go through these, but all that detail is there in your story. Why do I hate this business? Because I lost my shirt on 4 deals, okay? And again, all that detail is there. Every one of these deals met their objectives, looked like certain winners. I mean, great teams, great outcomes. And then bad things happened, like the market went away or closed down or no IPOs or things like that. So I lost $9 million on this great deal out of MIT. I lost $6 million in this hot .com era, a thing called Zip Realty, founded by 2 Berkeley MBA students. It was successful for a long time, then fell out of bed. And my worst of all was this one, which had the smartest, best people, unbelievable. This guy, Charles Berry, MIT undergrad, Stanford PhD, guru of telecom networks. Everything went right, and we even got it sold finally, but by that time, stressed industry and so forth, $20 million, and so on. If you're not a techie nerd and you do one reading, here's the one you'd probably want to read, is MIT's Tech Review magazine. It's the best report on startups and spin-outs and young entrepreneurs and tech trends and so forth. So I'd encourage you to do that. Real quick, Landmines on the Road to Success is another one of the core lectures. Landmines, what are landmines? Well, those are things that blow up in your face that when you step on them or drive over them. And just like there are landmines out there in the world of war, there's landmines in startup businesses. So we make a list of those things. So that includes founders trying to play the wrong roles, not having sufficient business experience on the team, inadequate capitalization, serious product issues, no CEO or wrong CEO, poor business plans, problematic intellectual property issues, regulatory issues, poor cash management, dysfunctional board. And so we always point out, it's not lawyers, accountants, politicians, bureaucrats, salesmen, and so forth that found companies. Those are the service professionals. It's mostly the techie nerds, inventors, oddballs, misfits, dropouts, the Steve Jobs of the world, Bill Gates of the world, and so on, who founds the companies. And they're the conceptual thinkers. But almost nobody in that universe has ever had a business class in their lifetime. With 8 years of college, I never sat in a business classroom in my life. So isn't it a little strange? I end up teaching at places like Sloan School and Stanford and so forth. But guys like me, when you go get in this business, you have to earn what we call the MBA from the school of hard knocks. And you don't forget those lessons because they're very painful, very powerful, but very useful. So, rolling forward, a lot of smart things to do. So the best thing about these landmines you encounter in startups is anticipate them and prevent them. So in general, founders, techie nerds, shouldn't try to be CEOs. They should stick to what they do best, which is usually product conceptualization and driving the company's future. So techies need business-savvy partner MBAs. You need to plan ahead for multiple capitalizations. R&D is a lot more than just building one product. A CEO is highly essential. We used to have a rule of thumb that quality of a business plan is inversely proportional to the thickness of it. So I've seen them written on napkins from a restaurant before. That's the case with compact computers, for example. And I've seen them 1 inch thick bound booklets. You know, I'd much more rather look at the napkin than I would the bound booklet. But a good one is about 15 or 20 pages with the essentials. You need to know a lot about intellectual property and patents and claims and so forth. Cash flow is more important than your mother, was said by one famous guy named Alan Shugart in Silicon Valley, who founded the 2 leading disk drive companies. What's the 10 smartest things to do in startups? Put together a balanced team, bring a major innovation forward, know your marketplace, be able to sell it to your grandmother or anybody you encounter on an elevator or anywhere else. Practice your storytelling, plan ahead for your capitalization, you know, make more happen with less, underspend, underperform, and show the zeal and excitement and cachet, because if you can't do that as founder, nobody else is going to take you for serious. And build lasting executive leadership. What's the dumbest things you can do? Is partner with your spouse as a co-founder. Because about a third of those are going to go awry and you're going to lose no matter what, okay? Don't trump up a minor innovation. Do your homework on that competitive marketplace and so on. Bootstrap financing too long is somebody else will beat you to the marketplace and so on. So let's finish up by talking just a little bit about Dallas area and where are we and where we're going. And so I was amused to learn, you know, Texans and Cowboy fans helped create maybe the world's greatest stadium for $1.3 billion. And just for calibration, that would start maybe 1,000 or 2,000 companies. So, you know, when given a choice, take both. But if you want, which adds greater to the economy, you know, the NFL or maybe 1,000 startups? I'll let you decide. So what's Dallas past look like? Well, of course, we got the Cowboys and NFL and the notoriety of the JFK assassination. But, you know, over 20 Fortune 5 headquarters, rampant real estate development, headquarters of one of the leading airlines in the middle of the country, great hub airport. But, you know, the wildcatter mentality, JR back in the old days of Dallas, the TV. How many of you were Dallas fans? Watched JR every Friday night? That's the way we saved our California boys from going out on the streets on Friday night. We helped them understand to watch old JR's exploits. So presently, what do we have? 7.4 million people, 4th largest metroplex in the U.S. Great educational institutions, major retailing and manufacturing hub, busiest airport, vibrant business community, and I think it's fair to say rapidly expanding entrepreneurship. 22 Fortune 5 companies. I'd like to know how many of those have venture investing arms, how many of them have venture supporting roles and such things, but I don't know what the real answer is, but whatever it is, there probably should be more. We should look at them as an opportunity. What's interesting is what amazing scatter of industries and technologies they represent, much more so diversity than Houston, for example. So what's the priorities? Move ahead, vastly expand entrepreneur education. That's the one thing I constantly talk to my friend, the provost, Steve Corral, about. Bringing more private wealth into the startup party. You know, in Houston, we've got something like 60, 70 billionaire families with family offices, mostly made from oil and gas and energy businesses. They don't invest in anything else. And so we've got to bring that kind of private wealth over into the startup game. We've got to create more entrepreneur ecosystems and ways to help entrepreneurs and more angels and VC investing firms. So what do we need most? We need exits. Nothing speaks to the success of this business like then successful outcomes. Companies being acquired, investors getting rewarded, entrepreneurs taking home the bacon, and then go start another one. So exits is the number one name of the game for this business. The way it works, of course, is you got to invent things. So you got things that drive inventions like big research grants to institutions and inventions in general and corporate spin-outs and so forth, who then entrepreneurs look at that stuff and then vet it and do due diligence on it and then pick deals to invest in and capitalize those and build teams around them. And they move ahead and bring product to market. And finally, when they're successful, they spin out investment returns and they spin out entrepreneurs who don't hang around acquiring companies very long to start the process over again. So this is the way it works. Now, one of my favorite themes is this thing called tech transfer functions. When Bill, where's Bill? Bill and I served on the ETF board together. Governor Perry appointed us to a committee of 5 to go examine tech transfer practices in Texas-based institutions, educational institutions, especially state universities, the publics. And he knew, he was smart enough to know that tech transfer functions were not properly organized or functioning. For example, UT Austin, when I first dealt with it, 17 professionals in the tech transfer function, 11 of them were lawyers, 5 were accountants, and there were 2 business guys who knew what they were doing, and 1 other. Well, it turns out that's not the only job, is to do transactions, which is what lawyers are all about, and they're important for that. But a proper operating office like this, you need to drive IP developments. So some techie nerd has got to go out there and call on all that faculty and help them learn how to write great lab notebooks and signify and date discoveries, and then learn how to write up disclosures and patent applications and so on. A lawyer can't do that, an accountant can't do that, only techie nerds can do that. So you got to drive IP development. If you do that well, you drive a lot of stuff to this office. Then you have to have some senior business people who can look at it and say, well, look, that's very narrow, so license it off to some big company, or that's a big technology platform, let's create a startup and deal with the venture community. So this is what's going on. Then, of course, you do need a few lawyers and a few accountants to do those transactions, but if you're designing an ideal mix in a 10-person office, you probably have 3 of these techie nerds driving, you probably have 3 or so doing the business judgment, and then a couple of attorneys, a couple of accountants. Certainly not 11, 5, and 1 or 2, okay? By the way, that committee of 5 lost its shirt because as soon as we were asked to go call on those tech transfer offices, and we tried to be modest and mild and approach them and explain to them we're there to help them, but they quickly recognized we're there to overhaul their operations and tell them how to run their function. So what do? They call their friends and politicians, who then call the governor and says, get the dogs out of here, you know. So that's the way the political world interferes in such a process. We don't have time to go through Autumn, but Autumn is a great organization of IP development and tech transfer functions and has a lot of useful role. This is just from your website. I was interested to note what all the things you have going. There's a dozen or so venture capital firms of note in the Dallas area. Here's the largest 5 with about 1.4 billion in management. The only one I've had personal experience with is Seven Rosen, who became a major player in Silicon Valley as well as the Texas market. And we also enjoyed several telecommunications deals together with them. And I'll love them forever because Ben Rosen was a longtime personal friend, and LJ7, he's a New Yorker. LJ was here in Dallas, hired my one and only daughter and got her into the venture capital business as a partner. Here's a recent publication, 20 Hottest Startups in Dallas-Fort Worth. How many of you know any of these deals personally or have seen them or looked at them? Okay, 3 people and out of 90, 4 people maybe. I'd like to know more about them. It looks like a healthy mix and certainly a well-diverse mix. Here's some interesting stories, 14 entrepreneurs on what it's like to be in Dallas. I wanted to mention this organization because I think it's an untapped opportunity for Dallas educational institutions and for entrepreneurs. This is a national organization founded in 1947 that recognizes individuals who overcome adversity, go on to become big successes, and then give back or share their good fortune. There's only been about 700 members now since founding. Every year we elect 10 new members. Here's just a sample of those members. Multiple presidents, secretaries of states, senators, and political people. Multiple entertainers and personalities, and a lot of great people. Athletes, astronauts, and so on, great people. A few academics, intellectuals, and such things. But look, founders of great iconic corporations like Walmart, IBM, Intel, CNNAA, Starbucks, McDonald's, and so on. All great pioneer entrepreneurs. This is sort of the heart cut of the organization. And what I wanted to point out to you is Dallas has more Horatio members than any city in America. Amazing number, something like 50 total. And these are some deceased members. I know Bob Dedman Sr. was a trustee here for a long time, and I think his son is current trustee, isn't he?
Current chair.
Yeah, current chair. Ibby Holiday, of course, a major profile across the area. Everybody knows Tom Landry and so on. But look here, every one of those could be a potential donor. They're all entrepreneurs, or they wouldn't be on this list. And it's up to you to go find them, meet them, greet them, rope them in, and get them engaged in something going on. And I can tell you, if you go ask every one of those people, you know, what made you successful? Was it your physics degree? Was it your doctorate in this? Was it your time at IBM? Or what was it? They'll all say pretty much the same one word: entrepreneurship. So that's their hot button. So I would love to see you get creative about how to rope those in. I'll finish here in just 2 minutes. In Houston, we have a lot of these same issues, maybe more. Houston, of course, is coming up on 7 million today, nation's third or fourth largest city. It's a world leader in energy industry worldwide. It's the world's largest medical center by far. But you know, there's not a long tradition of technology or entrepreneurship as we know it. And so Houston is addressing many of these same issues. So recognizing that, about 12 or 14 years ago, 2 of us decided we wanted to help. And so a guy named Rod Kenyon and myself, Rod Kenyon was principal founder of Compact Computers. Rod came out of Texas Instruments here in Dallas, founded the Goose Society, focused on helping entrepreneurs and to do angel investing. So our mission statement says that we're interested in recognizing, studying, promoting, teaching, practicing, supporting, and celebrating entrepreneurship. So that sounds like a broad-based, highly glorified mission, but you know, we wouldn't do this if we didn't think we'd make money while we're doing it. And secondly, we wouldn't do it if we didn't think we were helping entrepreneurs, okay? So we pick members who are successful entrepreneurs. Most live in Texas, California, and Colorado. Mostly all founders and CEOs and VCs. And that's our membership. And here's what it looks like. 25 individuals with a large aggregate net worth, everyone proven entrepreneur in one field or another. Even one academic on there, George McLendon, is a Texan, A&M PhD. He was chairman of chemistry at Princeton. He was dean of arts and sciences at Duke, and then Rice as provost, bioengineer, but he had founded 2 or 3 companies along the way, unusual for an academic who goes up the ladder, but a great bio-E entrepreneur. And so a lot of great people to hang around. One of the things we do is provide the prize for the Rice Biz Plan competition. Thanks to a guy named Steve Corral, legend at Rice, having founded the Rice Alliance for Technology and Entrepreneurship, the Rice Business Forums, and most of their other entrepreneur programs. The Rice Alliance has today become one of the world's most highly recognized and ranked entrepreneur center. You know, it's an arm's length appendage to the Biz School, but has close relationships across all science engineering and across Main Street to all the medical entities. And so when it went up market and they established the Rice Business Plan competition, here's the winner since '05, and I was pleased to work directly with Professor Corral at Rice at that time to help fine-tune this program and compare it to other leading programs. And so one of the ways was have the biggest prize. And prior to this, the biggest prize for any competition in the world was $100,000 at UT Austin's Moot Court program. Carnegie Mellon, MIT, and others were already having highly supported competitions. But what we wanted to do at that time, led by Professor Corral, was sort of go to the top of the heap. And so one way was to have the largest prize. If you won at UT Austin, 100,000 competition, you had to move your company to Austin to collect the prize. So in this case, I said to Steve, well, here's an easy one to fix. All we have to do is have a $100,000 prize or larger with no strings attached. And Steve said to me, well, Jack, that may sound easy to you, but I'm milking all my donors all I can already for all the support they give me. Just getting another 100,000 is not so easy. And I wised off a smart-ass comment. I said, well, sure it is. All we need to do is find 5 more guys as dumb as I am, divide 100,000 by 6, and that's 16,667, and that's how we got it. So Rod Cannon we called next, followed by Leo Lindbeck and a whole bunch of other Houstonians, 2 Californians. We've increased that prize over the years from 100,000 to now 300,000. And sometimes at the podium when the winners are being announced, we'll double or triple it on the spot. So the Goose Society has been the leader in providing all these prizes since then. And you can see Rice has never won its own competition. Although it's placed second or third a couple of times. Maybe someday they'll win. But Northwestern is notably A&M, MIT, Texas, so forth. So Goose members have invested over $17 million in those winners, 11 winners. And we've received back more than 2x. We've had 5 liquidities. 4 of them were Rice Biz Plan winners, okay? And this is a list of companies that they're currently invested in, another 30 million or so in 24 separate companies. So Professor Corral left a great legacy at Rice of entrepreneurial programs, and I'm pleased to see he continues to have that a part of his great mission as a more senior leader in academia. So in closing, you know, I think angel investors can play a much bigger role here in Dallas. I think you can collaborate with all these other institutions around, like Houston-based VCs and angels. I think it'd be smart to create some unique activities that you could kind of call your own and brand them on a national kind of sense. And one way to do that would be, there's a whole new cadre or a list of new people doing things. For example, Station Houston is only about 5 years old. It has something like 60 startups working in one building in downtown Houston. Amazing story. Grit Labs is 2 female partners in Silicon Valley with a new venture firm focused on AI and robotics. Angel MD is a Seattle-based group very resourcefully focused on life science investments. Texas Med Center X is a huge program at the Texas Med Center in Houston. J Labs is a part of that, Johnson & Johnson entity. This is a Austin-based venture capital firm, 2 female partners, and so on. Recently, I noticed my old friend Chris Kersey has moved in town. Anybody know that guy? Chris Kersey is, physician by trade, a Harvard MBA on top of that. Managed venture capital money for Bob McNair, owner of Houston Texans, in his earlier career. And then he went back east somewhere, and I just recently discovered he's in Dallas with this firm, Haven Crest Ventures. Anyway, so that's it. Thank you for listening. Happy to answer any questions, or maybe a few, and then I know we have goodies outside we'd rather probably jump into. Yes, Bill.
So Jack, I've been thinking about the mega funds, and as you started earlier in your presentation, the difficulty they're going to have in returns. SoftBank's got the largest, $100 billion mega fund. Difficult to think about how they're going to make returns.
How can you 10x that?
So my question is, do they have an ulterior motive?
Well, what I would tell you is what my friend Tom Perkins explained way back in those old days. Not only it's easier to get a bigger multiple return on a small base, but he also told me, Jack, once you become successful in this business, it's like pulling teeth to raise a first fund because you haven't managed OPM, other people's money. Once you have and have a track record, people will line up to give you money. And that's what happened to us in Vanguard 2 and so forth. The next thing he told me was, Jack, it's irresistible, nearly impossible not to go up market because you can have your cake and eat it too. The more money you have under investment, the more your management fee is. So yes, indeed, on today's mega funds, you can get rich just earning management fee, whether you produce any return results or not. So the more money you have under management, the more junior partners you could have. But now when Tom told me that, I said, well, look, you and Gene Kleiner with a $25 million fund created amazing results. You brought Genentech and Tandem Computers and so forth. They returned 30x on that partnership, Kleiner Perkins 2. I said, now you're hiring more junior partners with less experience and so forth. How do you keep that going? Because you become, like any other large firm, a management firm. So one or two senior partners has to manage a bunch of junior partners who hire a bunch of young green weenies right out of biz school, law school, and tech programs. And you know, it's dilutive of the relative experience you have in a firm. So I'm not a big fan of mega funds. You know, I don't think many of them are going to perform well. Their strategy these days is raise a big ton of money and shotgun it across the marketplace, hoping to find luck into one more Google or one more Amazon or one more of this or that. That's a very different strategy from classic venture capital.
With an average investment of $1.5 billion.
Yeah. So if you want to know sort of the fate of those, track, you know, the KKRs and the Carlyles and some of those other private equity firms who've managed big money. And you know, you notice they did a lot better in the early days than they did in the later days. Any other questions?
I'm taking Grassler's class at UT Southwestern on commercialization, academic commercialization. One of the things that kind of isn't covered, and you didn't cover it at all, was the concept of a split between the for-profit venture capital, very entrepreneurial animal spirits, and kind of what England is doing, some Western Europe, is a social impact bond, which is trying to solve a social good, but rather than doing it through a pure capitalistic environment, have part of the bond be for-profit, have part of the bond be attached to mandatory improvements in the public good or the public health.
Well, before I get misquoted, I'll comment on that. First, I'm a big Francophile. I'm a big Europhile. I've lived a large fraction of my life managing businesses in Europe. At one time, one of my companies, I had I had subsidiaries in 17 countries in Europe. So I love Europe. I love the culture and history and so forth. But I got bad news for you Europeans. You're not even on the plate of participation. You know, for a place of, you know, hundreds of millions of people, it's just incredible. The distance between Moscow and Lisbon is less than a distance between New York and Los Angeles. And yet between Moscow and Lisbon, you got 30 languages, 40 cultures, endless socialism, and you know, it's not a pretty picture, and it has never supported entrepreneurship. Now the Brits, I love the Brits, you know, they've made notable efforts to get in this game, but most of their success is when they invested in American venture firms. So, you know, whereas I'm an optimist, I'd love to believe something's good going to come out of that, I'm not very optimistic about that. If you look for the best entrepreneurs in greater Europe, they're in Israel. Yes, Richard.
There's a lot of talk in your thing about inventive, creative ideas that propel something forward, particularly in technology. How about just plain old reorganization of existing businesses? You know, the Sam Walton bit, which created Walmart, or then Jeff Bezos with
Right.
Amazon. I was in professional services as a one-man company, and I built something today for about 700 people. But, you know, and it was more the reorganization of existing businesses, but along a little different pattern.
I have two stories about that. Yeah, one of my 18 core lectures is career planning. So I teach these young students what to look for when they go out in the real world. So, you know, I teach them to take a step at a time, basic approach, rather than jump too far at a time. So if you've got a PhD in a science or engineering topic, or an MBA, you may want to work at a GE or IBM or some great company for 2 to 5 years to get your feet on the ground and develop some maturity and see how things are done. But if you're highly ambitious, you're probably not going to hang around that, long term. So if you didn't have an MBA, that's a great time to go back and get one. If you had a PhD in science or engineering, you'd probably want to jump into a high growth organization, like a Microsoft or some company that's mature maybe, but higher, twice the average annual growth. And that's where you can flex your wings and practice and get good experience. And then after maybe a few years of that, you're ready to jump into an entrepreneurially driven company like a Google or an Amazon or some younger startup. So that patient step at a time approach is one thing I say about that. Now, when I talk to the students about what life is like when you jump into those high risk company, high growth companies, you've been there about a year. You're just getting comfortable. You've got a team of 8 or 12 of you working over here in this project, in this division, and you feel like you're just getting on top of what the job's all about. But you're smart and you're cognizant. There's 3 of us that's making this thing happen, and 3 or 4 freeloaders who are behind the power curve dragging us back. And we come to work one day, and the bulletin boards are always pasted with massive postings. And for some reason, they're always pastel colors like pink or green or blue. And what it does is announces a massive reorganization of the whole company. So they wiped out this whole division I'm a part of. And I got reassigned to another one over here I know nothing about. Now, why do high growth companies do this? If a company is growing 20 or 30% a year, can humans grow 20 to 30% a year in maturity and experience and increased performance? No. Because if we did, then all of us would be president of the United States in 10 years. So companies grow faster than people develop. So corporate reorganizations, and they call it reorg, 5-letter word reorg, are designed to keep people in jobs commensurate with their ability to perform. If they don't do that, people get in over their heads, then sometimes get fired or get frustrated and go away. So reorg is a healthy process. That's my first statement. On the other hand, it depends on your interest, your ambition, and how far you want to go and how fast. And smarter people are, the less patient they are, the faster they want to move up. And so that gets into what Malcolm Gladwell writes a lot of books about, like outliers. He says right place, right time. Don't wait for a right place, right time to randomly show up for you. Go put yourself where it's more likely to be the right place, right time. So if you're a hotshot genetics PhD, you would want to be in San Diego or maybe Houston or maybe Boston. That's where all the action is. Okay, if you're a hotshot mathematics algorithm expert, you want to go where apps, doing AI or robotics or something. So put yourself in the right place, right time. So that's all a part of career planning. And we think that's an important element of the classes that we teach.
Let's have one more question, and then we'll adjourn out into the lobby. Yeah, sure. What do you think the most disruptive technologies of today are?
Of today? Okay, well, I just mentioned 2 of them, AI and robotics, for sure. There's a dozen new venture capital firms being formed to focus on these. And whereas we used to think of robots as little things that look like human creatures walking around and handing you your newspaper or something, we're now talking robots. How about in a greenhouse? A robot that goes up and down the line every day. It watches every strawberry growing on every plant. And it picks those that are weird or distorted or ugly or not going to ripen, throws them away. And so 2 months later, or whatever that cycle is, you end up with perfect strawberries. It picks them exactly the perfect time. So robotic applications, but industrial applications have rapid payout, for example. AI, drones, talk about drones. You know how many drones there are flying in? How many drone flyers do we have here? Only one, and the only one under 20, right? Drones are amazing fun, but the first thing you learn if you fly drones is you're going to crash that sucker in about 3rd time out. Because they can go up and down, side, left, forward, back, 6 degrees of freedom, and the human brain cannot cope with how to control that thing, because if it's yawed around this way and you push a button, it goes forward, that's normal. But if it's yawed around coming towards you, you push it forward, it comes at you. if you're yawed 39 degrees to the left, you don't have a clue where that sucker's going to go, and you're going to hit the first pine tree, right? But now put that aside. For example, there is a new startup in Houston called Fluidity. A guy named Scott, who's a former astronaut, Stanford MD by background, 6 shuttle missions. He wants to make a controller much more reliable for the average consumer. So he has invented a device that looks like a little joystick, and it's all intuitive. So you can fly the drone by going this way, and then spiral it down, come towards you, or go away or sideways. It's amazing technology instead of inventions. Now, he's a physician astronaut, for God's sake, but he hired senior people out of the aerospace industry who know, robotics and airplanes and helicopters and such things. And what are the serious applications? Like monitoring power line leakages, like monitoring thermals and chemical leakages in oil refineries, all these serious applications. So drones are coming on very strong. Military, of course, uses them for a lot of overseas operations, but commercial applications. And of course, everybody talks about when will they deliver pizza to your front door. But one of the best notions is people like UPS or FedEx will have something like a little building about 6 foot by 6 foot big that's lockable, and they'll deliver your FedEx packages by drone and deposit them in that. And you can then collect them in your neighborhood, or they'll have another FedEx guy just walk around the neighborhood and take them out of that little thing and deliver it to your front door. So there are a lot of serious applications underway.
Let's thank our speakers.